Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Arthur Vaughn. I am the Health and Wellness Chair and Political Action Chair for the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta. We serve Cobb, North Fulton, and Gwinnett counties. Today, we are joined by candidate John Barge, who's running for State School Superintendent. We are happy to have him here. We've also invited the other gentleman running in the May runoff election against Mr. Barge, and when and if he joins, we'll be happy to have him as well. And I must state that the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta is a nonpartisan organization, and we do not endorse or support any individual candidate or party, but we are very interested in issues of education, because one of the main things we do, one of our main pillars, is mentoring and education, and we want to make sure and be well informed about what's going on in our educational system here in Georgia. So John, again, thank you for taking time out of what I know is your busy schedule to join us today. I'm starting to see people join us, and as people join, we will go ahead and add them, but we do have some pre-prepared questions that we have. But again, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate you setting this up, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys and share my thoughts and visions with you.
Well, thank you. And as I mentioned last week, we did one for the Democratic candidates. Roughly 50 people showed up, and both of these will be rebroadcast on our social media pages, so people have an opportunity to hear your thoughts and hear what you're about in your candidacy. But one of the things I took from last week's conversation, so this is a little different question than I asked last week. So tell me, from your perspective, considering school boards are locally elected, school systems are locally controlled by those school boards, what can a state school superintendent do, and what can a state school superintendent not do as it relates to things that impact student learning?
Well, that's a great question, and I appreciate you asking that, and I appreciate that insight, because a lot of folks don't really understand the difference. And having been state school superintendent previously, and having been a local school superintendent, I know both sides of this fence, so to speak. I've been on the local side working with an elected board, and I've been the state superintendent working with an appointed board who's appointed by the governor. But either way requires that the superintendent really nurture those relationships that exist, between the superintendent and the board, because even though they're elected differently, they are designed as kind of a balance of power, so to speak. So a board cannot do anything without the superintendent's recommendation, whether locally or the state. But neither can the superintendent really do anything without the board's approval. With some limited exceptions, it depends on the local board. Some of them set up some contract guidelines where if it's something that's under a certain threshold, then the superintendent can sign it without the board's approval. And that varies from board to board. When I was state school superintendent, the threshold was $50,000. When I was a local school superintendent, my threshold was $5,000. So, that meant that you really had to work closely with your board. So you're right in that the local school board is responsible for the education of that local school system. But where the state superintendent has leverage is with policy. That one of the major responsibilities of the state superintendent and the state school board is to set policy for local school districts to operate within. So basically, you're setting the framework and you're establishing the guardrails and the frame for those local school districts to operate within. So when it comes to standards, the state sets the standards. So that's the state standards that our teachers are required to teach. But your local school board and your local superintendent is going to determine what curriculum they use to teach those standards with, because the state doesn't pass down or set any specific curriculum. So there's a big difference between standards and curriculum. So the standards the state sets, the superintendent with the state sets those standards, but then that local district decides what curriculum they use to teach those standards by. So there's a lot that you can do within the realm of policy. There's a lot that you could do within the realm of, let's say, disbursement of funds. And I've experienced that as a local school superintendent, and this is one of the things that I would definitely make sure that it is addressed if I'm so fortunate to be elected again. Also, oftentimes the state has let's say, a pool of money that's granted to them by the legislature or, by, somebody else, and they make that money available to local school districts, but they make that money available to them by the means of a competitive grant process. So the local school districts have to design grants, write grants to compete for the funds that are available. And that's all well and good. But the issue for that is in rural Georgia, where I was a superintendent and where most of our districts in Georgia are rural, they don't have the staff on hand to actually sit down and go through the process and write these competitive grants. So I would certainly want to make sure that, and I certainly understand that you don't have enough money to go around to everybody, but we would want to make sure that we made staff available to local school districts to help in the process of writing those competitive grants, since I know, I've experienced the fact that they don't have the personnel to get that done. So it's a shame that they miss out on opportunities because they're not let's say, a Metro Atlanta district that has lots of central office personnel to fill out these grants. So long answer to your question, but there's a lot that the state superintendent can do, even though education is a local control issue. Does that make sense?
It does. And actually, that was very insightful. And I learned some things I didn't know and through your answer. But your answer also brings up two new questions for me. The first question is, you referenced that you had been state school superintendent previously.
Yes.
So was your transition because you elected not to run again? Did you lose an election? What happened that where you were and you're not now? State school.
Yeah. So yes, I chose not to run again, and my opponent makes a big deal out of that. But there are reasons why I chose not to run again. I am an educator by trade. I retired 2 years ago after a 30-year career in public education. But I had some pretty significant clashes with the governor's office over educational issues, during my time in office. And it was mainly over the funding issue. If you recall back to because I was superintendent from 2011 to 2015. That was a time period where there were significant austerity cuts to local school districts. I mean, so much so that thousands of teachers in Georgia lost their jobs because the governor's office, the legislature, as they were approving the budget, were withholding over $1 billion a year from local school districts in the state of Georgia, and money that they had earned through the state funding formula, through these austerity cuts. And so literally that had incredible impacts across the state. At one point I had about 6 school districts that were literally weeks away from bankruptcy, not being able to pay teachers. That the funds got so low because in rural Georgia, they don't have the tax base that Metro Atlanta has. So if the state's going to withhold them, like for example, I was in McIntosh County, our entire budget was $15 million a year. The state withholding $1 million in austerity cuts, that has a huge impact on our school district. And that's an impact that the local tax base cannot absorb. So it really had, I went to visit a school in South Georgia during that time, and there was it was an elementary school, and we were there during the school day, and the lights were off. And I asked the principal, I said, so why are the lights off? And they said, we can't afford to pay the power bill. And so there were some things that I did not support. Mainly it was the constitutional amendment on the charter school initiative. And it wasn't the charter schools that I didn't support, because I've written planning grants for charter schools. I love charter schools. but it was the need for the charter school commission that I didn't agree with. So anyway, long story short, without, poking anybody, there were just things that were, if I had run for reelection, it would not have been good either for me or for education in general. And so I decided to run against the governor in the primary, because I don't make a good figurehead. I like to make a difference. And so, I wanted to force that conversation on education and funding for the state. And so that didn't work out. Of course, we know that didn't work out. And so that I couldn't run for state superintendent and governor. So, hindsight's 2020, maybe I should not have, and I should have stuck it out. But going from there to being a local superintendent, that really helped me, and especially being a superintendent in rural Georgia, gain a much better perspective and a framework to work statewide. Does that make sense?
Sure. And if I remember correctly, that would have been Governor Deal at the time, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, I just wanted to make sure. I was trying to put it all together. All right. Because with Governor Deal, I've served on NPEC's board, the Post-Secondary Education Commission. Yeah, I chaired that under Governor Deal. So I was just trying to make sure I made it.
Which board?
Non-public post-secondary education.
Okay. Gotcha. All right.
So and
Governor Deal and I are great. We've mended our fences, and he actually supports me in this race. So.
Oh, all right. That's outstanding. So you mentioned moments ago or early on that if you were reelected, you would, to the degree that's fiscally responsible, have staff help people in rural communities compete for some of these competitive funding grants, right?
Absolutely.
So in addition to that, if you were elected superintendent, what other of your own projects or initiatives would you bring to the job in addition to the one we've already talked about?
Okay, sure. Well, I will continue some things and then bring some other things to the table. So one of the things that I did put into place when I was state superintendent that has been incredibly successful for the state of Georgia is our career pathway system. That was something that I actually designed career pathways in 2004 when I was the state director of career and technical education for Georgia under Kathy Cox as superintendent. But it took me, becoming state superintendent in 2010 to actually get those career pathways put into place. So I worked with the board, I worked with the legislature, we got that put into state law. The career pathways is a phenomenal resource for our kids to really bring relevancy to what they're learning and to find an area of passion for students that they are interested in and design an educational opportunity for them to be successful. So we'll continue to support the career pathways, continue to work with the technical college system to make sure those dual enrollment programs are strong so that students are earning college credit in these career pathways while they're in high school. So I'm a huge proponent of the career pathway system. In fact, I worked with Stephanie Johnson when I was state superintendent, and she was principal at, I think she might've been principal, was she at Martin Luther King High School in Atlanta?
I don't know. I live in Cobb County.
Okay, I think she might have
Marietta High School.
I think she might have been at Martin Luther King, but I worked with her to get the first ag program put into a City of Atlanta public school.
Okay.
And so, and it's been incredible. She's loved it. She said it was incredibly successful. So aside from that, there are a couple of things that I would do. One of the first things I would do is within the Department of Education, establish an office of transparency and accountability so that when community members, people at the local level are having concerns or issues, and they don't feel like they are getting those issues addressed at a local level, then they can come to the state and they could get some help from somebody on my staff on how to, let's say, maneuver a school board meeting, how to, apply, to speak at a school board meeting or whatnot. I would also, we've got, we all know what the research says about K-3, and children have to be reading on grade level by third grade, or they will struggle the rest of their school careers. But have we really taken and done anything initiative-wise to make sure that we are focusing on that from a state level? Some individual school districts may have done that, but where has the state actually set the framework, so to speak, or set the vision for this to happen? So if it is so important, which we all know it is, why are we doing anything pre-K through third grade that is not focused on basic literacy and basic numeracy so that our children are prepared for success by the end of third grade? So we'll look at those reading initiatives, we'll look at those reading programs, we'll look at the amount of time, we'll look at get together with reading specialists, get together with those experts in the state, and let's put together a plan for moving forward to make sure that our teachers, especially pre-K through third grade, have the time that they need to actually teach reading, that they're not pulled off over here doing a social emotional learning lesson or whatever else they may be. We've got to focus on reading. Am I saying that we don't have art, music, PE, those special class? No, those are very important. But do you know how much reading and math that you could teach in those special areas that you can reinforce? So there's certainly a way that we can do that, but we've got to be focusing on reading at those levels. So bringing us back to that foundation, what is our core mission? And removing everything that is in teachers' way that is preventing them from focusing on what they were trained to teach. I talk to so many teachers that feel like they are almost being forced into this role of being a mental health counselor. And that's not their role. That's not what they were trained to do. That's what our counselors were trained to do. Not every child needs all of those services. And so to expect a teacher to do that, I think we're pulling them away from what they were trained to do, and then we're not getting the job done. So those are a few things.
All right. Well, those few things have led me into another couple of questions.
Okay.
All right. So one of the questions is, every kid, every K through 12 student doesn't want to, and isn't, geared towards going to a 4-year education.
You're absolutely right.
You talked about the career pathways, and I love them personally. My daughter's doing an architecture career pathway.
Awesome.
But do we do a good enough job in marketing vocational and career classes and apprenticeships? Or and if not, what changes do we need to make in that space? Well,
I think certainly the state could do a better job because when you're talking about marketing, I think what we can do as a State Department of Education is we could do a much better job branding our career pathways as a state. They're out there, they're designed, the courses are laid out, and they're there for local school districts to pick and choose which ones they're going to offer. But we could do a better job creating a brand that becomes very well known across the state, and it would bring some consistency, from district to district. So I think we could do a better job marketing those. And I do think that we still fight that stigma that career tech education or vocational education is less than. But the more that you can get out the data and the research about the success that children can have through a 2-year technical system, that they can get out of a technical college and start earning $80,000 as a welder. The trades are an incredibly viable opportunity for children to be incredibly successful. And just that recognition that all children are not the same. And we have way too many 4-year college graduates that are living in their parents' basements or working or vastly underemployed because they went to college and they borrowed a lot of money and they have a degree in something that there is no job growth in. And it's hard to be gainfully employed. So it's not just making sure that we've got the pathways in place, but it is, as you say, the marketing and the the guidance to make sure children are finding those areas of growth, working with economic development to make sure that as new technologies arise and new jobs are created, that we are on the cutting edge with the creation of new pathways to make sure that we can provide students opportunities in those areas. And youth apprenticeship, we need to do a much better job with youth apprenticeship. I love youth apprenticeship. When I was state superintendent in the past, I had the opportunity to study the educational system in Switzerland. And that is a phenomenal educational system. And they make tremendous use of youth apprenticeship. They actually stop mandatory education in Switzerland after 9th grade. And students make a decision after 9th grade whether they want to continue their education or not. 90% of them choose to continue, but then they choose a path and their path is either apprenticeship or advanced high school, which prepares them for a 4-year college experience. Of their 90% that go on, 70% choose the apprenticeship route, 30% choose the advanced high school. But they have multiple off-ramps and on-ramps. So if you choose the apprenticeship route and you decide, 2 years into your apprenticeship, oh, I really do think I want to go to a 4-year college so I could be a teacher or a lawyer, they could then switch back over to the advanced college or the advanced high school and finish up advanced high school to prepare for college. So they have opportunities for that. But the reason that it works so well is that you have business and industry that take on a tremendous role of educating students after 9th grade, and they educate them as those standards or those skills apply to the trade. So if you're going into the banking apprenticeship, you're going to learn your advanced math skills as they apply to the banking industry. The banking industry is going to be teaching you the math that they need in banking. The construction industry or the architecture industry is going to be teaching you math as it applies to that industry. Because quite frankly, I have a doctorate degree in educational leadership. I have not factored in equations since college algebra. I don't use it in my profession. I use a lot of statistics. And so that's what's great about the apprenticeship program too, and that if we could really beef up our program and get business and industry at the table with us to, let's say, even create some different math courses for students that are more relevant. Let's say a construction math or a construction geometry. I mean, Lord, you could teach the Pythagorean theorem with the 3, 4, 5 rule of construction in a heartbeat. And those children will know Pythagorean theorem because they've applied it. So that's, again, long answer. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. I want to move back into the classroom, though, with my next question. Next question is, in a lot of professions, your supplies and the things you need to do your job are paid for by your employer. Our teachers, on the other hand, often are spending money out of their own pockets in order to supply their classrooms. How can you support taking the burden for paying for classroom equipment off of teachers? What can we do to change that dynamic?
That is an incredibly good question. And it's not one that I've really have a solution for, because that's going to vary from school district to school district. There are some districts that are more fortunate than others that have tremendous local tax bases that they can do that. I know that as a superintendent in McIntosh County, we were 100% free and reduced lunch. We were a very poor county financially, but we would still take advantage of our co-op buying opportunity with our local RESA, and we would make purchases at the beginning of the school year for a lot of those supplies for teachers. But that does not mean that they still did not have to supplement. We didn't get into buying tissues and hand sanitizer. We would buy them dry erase markers and pens and notebook paper and things like that. But there are lots of things that teachers do still come out of their pocket with. And I just don't have a good answer for that. I am totally open to working with folks to figure out how, as a state, we could address that. And maybe it's through some legislature and some funding and some additional fund through the QBE funding formula for those purposes. Most schools are not purchasing textbooks anymore. They're going with iPads and Chromebooks and laptops and things. But there's got to be a way. I just, I don't have a great answer for you right now. I just know that we can do better, and we should.
All right. No, thank you for your transparency in that answer. My next question is about, you mentioned being in a rural system before, and I want to ask a question about rural Georgia. So rural schools seem to struggle to attract teachers, especially since urban and suburban districts pay more. How
Right.
do we get teachers into our rural classrooms, including those with qualifications to teach things like special ed, computer programming, and other specialties?
There are a few things that you can do. There are a few things that we did in our county. We were particularly, we struggled particularly in McIntosh, because to the south of us, I mean, just 15 miles was Brunswick and the beaches, of St. Simons and Jekyll. And so they have, not only a broader tax base, but they have the lure and the attraction of the beach, there. We were on the coast, but we didn't have a bridge out to our island. And so we're actually the only school district in the state that has students that ride a ferry to school every day.
Wow.
We have students that live on Sapelo Island, and there's no bridge to Sapelo. So they ride a ferry to school every day and then ride it home. And then to the north of us, we had, what's that?
I said, that sort of sounds cool.
Yeah. So, and then to the north of us, we had Liberty County, which had a large military base. And so they had a tremendous amount of federal money flowing into that district through, federal impact aid and the bases. And so they were giving $5,000 signing bonuses, which we could not do. But there are ways that you can market your community. There are ways that you can identify your strengths and then play to those strengths. So whether it's quality of life, whether it's, you make a video, you make a brochure or whatever, it's not always about money for a lot of teachers. Some teachers like smaller classrooms. They like smaller communities. They like a slower lifestyle, which many rural communities can offer. I think making sure that you're successful is also very important. And I think making sure that you have a family of teachers, you create a dynamic in your small community that as a school district, you're really a family. And then if you can do that, then you have teachers who can also spread the word to other people about how great it is to work in this system. And you don't have these issues that you have up here in a larger system. We're closer knit. And so it is a challenge, but there are several things that you can do to market your strengths and play to your strengths and recruit those teachers. In addition to that, with career pathways, you can grow your own, so to speak, and you can create a education pathway in your high school and have students getting started early in a teaching profession by completing the education pathway and them actually getting some college credit for coursework that they take, and then growing your own through that way.
Oh, cool. Thank you. And my next question, and soon I'm going to go into the chat where I'm hoping everyone places their questions if you have them. But we know some of our students, they come to school with challenges and issues outside of their making, but they bring them from home into the school, right?
Yes.
Some homelessness, missed meals, things related to poverty, and even internet access in some of our communities, right? What should the next school superintendent do to help students succeed despite things that are happening outside of the classroom?
Well, one thing that Georgia has needed to do for a long time, and it would require the legislature to act, is we have grossly underfunded school counselors in Georgia for decades. Unless something's changed since I've been retired, we are funding one counselor for every 450 students. And in today's society, with what we have going on with social media and all that has added to the plate of students with bullying and stress and all those types of things, we need to fund more counselors so that teachers, when they have these issues in their classroom with students, that there are resources there that can help them. So I think that we need to make sure that we have that in place. There are things that you can do. For example, in rural Georgia, we partnered, we had some grant money. We worked with the state, and we were, I guess it came through the Department of Behavioral Health. It was an Apex grant that allowed us, our entire county, I don't think we had a doctor, not much less a hospital, so we were able to get a telemedicine unit. We actually had two, one at the high school and one at the elementary school. The school nurses were trained in how to use that telemedicine unit. We were then hooked into local doctors, hospitals, I think at one point, maybe even Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. So students could be seen virtually by a doctor. Not the best situation, and there are only some things that you can do virtually, but having that access was very helpful, because in many cases, our parents didn't have transportation either, to come to school and pick up their child and go to the next county to the doctor. And so that was helpful. We had we worked with a nonprofit, I can't remember the name of it, but they brought in a mobile dental van twice a year to provide dental services on site that parents would sign up for. And so in many cases, students that wouldn't have the opportunity to have dental care, it was provided for them at school by a licensed, practicing dentist, and it was great. So I certainly think that we need to learn, because there are many districts that are doing those types of things. We need to, maybe bring some of those districts together and find out what's working and see how can we scale this up. How can the state lead in scaling these things up so that other communities can learn and benefit from it. And I'm speaking, as a child who grew up in that type of environment. I grew up in Cobb County, graduated from Campbell High School. We were poor, ate free lunch. My dad was an alcoholic. He was abusive. I took a lot of baggage to school with me, but but I had teachers, that saw the potential and really just kind of took me under the wing and gave me the opportunity to be successful. So, and many times it just takes that one teacher, that sees the potential, takes that child under the wing. I've spoken to so many teachers in the past several weeks, and it's so disheartening. I spoke to, well, not just teachers, I spoke to two parents today, and they said, their children just hate school. That they have teachers that tell them, I don't care what you do, and I know that that's coming from, maybe a very slanted mind of a child who's maybe just as frustrated, but I know teachers are frustrated, and I know that many of them are leaving the profession, and there's not a silver bullet that's going to help every child, but just like making a decision to run for this seat again, I know the challenges, and I know that it would be much easier for me to stay retired and enjoy my grandchildren. But if we don't, I don't know that I could look at myself in the mirror knowing that I had an opportunity to make a difference and I chose not to. So we just have to, the best we can, not be discouraged when we can't help them all. But we've got to be there for them, because in many cases, we're all they have.
All right. Well, John, I have one more question, then I'm going to jump into the chat. Then I'm going to come back with a wrap-up question, but I want to give people in the chat an opportunity to get their questions asked. And we've had people join us throughout the evening. A couple of people I do want to recognize is our president, Mr. Bernard Johnson, who joined our call, and our mentoring chair, Mr. Harold Edward. Now, if you don't know anything else about the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta, we are a mentoring chapter. We are very much committed to mentoring middle school and high school young men, and even college students through Collegiate 100 at Kennesaw State. So we say we do mentoring through a lifetime. So education is important, and we have the leaders of our educational programs and several of our core mentors on with us. So you should know that education is critical for us. But one of the questions that I've asked everyone who we spoke to so far, you know, this core idea that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely a product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in the legal systems and policies. Do you believe critical race theory should be taught in public schools? Why or why not?
I really don't. I don't think that it should. I think that, you know, I heard a program today while I was, you know, driving around the state to some various campaign things. And I think the true critical race theory is something that should be kind of retained at that post-secondary level, at the college level. And the reality is that a lot of what we lump a lot of things into critical race theory that may not be the textbook definition of critical race theory. But we've got to be careful, in my opinion, that we are not teaching anything to our children that would convey to them a message of, you know, you are oppressed because of the color of your skin, or you are an oppressor because of the color of your skin. Anything that would divide. You know, our children don't come to us as racist. And I hate the idea that we would, I mean, I certainly get both sides of this, but to teach anything that would make them feel like they should be less than or more than because of the color of their skin, I think is wrong. And we really don't need to do that. Do we need to teach all of our American history? Absolutely. I think one of the biggest travesties of my life is I have 4 college degrees and I was 52 years old before I ever heard about Black Wall Street. That's unacceptable. That our entire history needs to be included in our standards. One of the things I did in McIntosh County, because that's always been the problem with history, is you don't have enough time to teach it. And so, like, even when I was in school, you would, you know, when we took U.S. history, we'd get up to the, you know, maybe the Civil War, maybe to World War I, but then you would have like 2 weeks of school left to do all the rest of it. Well, we've had 50 more years of history since then. And we've never added any time to the school day. We still have 1 unit for U.S. history. So what I did in McIntosh County was I got with my social studies teachers, and we took the state standards for history, for U.S. history, and we divided them into 2 courses. And we required our students in McIntosh to have 2 years of U.S. history, because that then gave our teachers time to go into detail and into in-depth study on some of these issues. Giving them more time like that will allow them, because I know the argument is, well, we don't have time. We don't have time. We don't have time. We've got to make time to make sure we are teaching the good, the bad, and the ugly of our history, not just a whitewashed version, or not just, you know, the good parts. We need to teach it all. And I think that could address some of the concerns. But when it comes to race, I think we have. Are we perfect? No, but I think we've made so much progress. We don't need to take ourselves backwards by teaching our kids that one group may be inherently racist because of their skin, and the other group is inherently oppressed because of their skin. That's not helpful.
Okay, all right. So we're going to move on to some of the questions. Well, thank you for all of your answers so far, but we want to move to some of the questions in the chat. So if you have a question, feel free to put it there. But one of our questions we have is that statistics state or suggest that 8 out of 10 jobs over the next 20 years are going to be IT related. What is your plan to build STEM related institutes in underrepresented areas so that minority children can be competitive for scholarships in higher education and higher paying jobs?
It's a great question. And we actually, when I was state superintendent previously, it was when we actually created the STEM endorsement for schools. So that was actually done under my tenure when I was state superintendent. We actually staffed at the Department of Education people within STEM who created the STEM endorsement for school districts across the state of Georgia. So a number of districts have been very successful in certifying their schools as STEM schools. But in rural Georgia, it is a challenge because you're going to have in some communities a connectivity issue. That has been, the state has really worked on that issue and it's greatly improved, but it's still not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But we can create those partnerships with business and industry to come in and partner with school districts to make sure they have the resources that they need. In fact, we put in a, I don't know if it was, we put in a project engineering program in my in my middle school in McIntosh County, and we actually partnered with a local business and industry who put up the money for that, and then we named the classroom for that industry, for that business that partnered with us. And I can't even at this time I can't remember what the name of the business was, but they had a plaque on the door that this was the such and such pre-engineering lab. So there are ways as a state that you could help bring those business and industries to the table to partner with local school districts to get the resources that they need for STEM education.
Outstanding. All right. So another one of our folks, our viewers, as it were, want to know, what do you think are the most critical issues facing Georgia schools going forward?
I think one of our critical issues is we're so far removed from what our core mission is. We have put so many other expectations on the plates of teachers that many of them don't have the time to teach what they were trained to teach. And I think we're seeing that when we look at the data and we look at results. So for example, in 2013, when I was state superintendent, Education Week, they do a study every year called Quality Counts, where they study the educational systems in every state in the country, and they rank them based on the scores that they give and the outcomes. In 2013, they ranked the overall quality of Georgia's educational system 7th in the nation. 7 years later, 2020, which was the last year that they did it, they haven't done it since 2020 because of the pandemic. But in 2020, we were ranked 31st. So from 2013 to 2020, we fell 24 slots. In 2013, we had our highest NAEP scores in state history on 4th and 8th grade reading and math, and 8th grade. Our 4th grade reading and math NAEP scores are the lowest they've been now in 15 years. And that was measured in 2019, which is a year before the pandemic. So I can only imagine what they are now. So we've been going backwards quickly in a lot of areas. And I think part of that is our focus has been taken off of what the main thing should be, and that is teaching our children to read, write, to do math, to solve problems, to teach them how to think. And all of the issues that the cultural issues that have come to the forefront, my issue is not with whether you believe these or whether you support these or whether whatever you choose is whatever you choose. I don't want us to make our schools the battleground for cultural wars. Our schools are to teach children how to think and how to solve problems, to teach them to read and write and do math. And I think we've got so much other stuff going on out there, it's distracting us from our core mission. And I think it's showing in the data. So I think that's probably, in my opinion, one of our biggest issues.
Well, thank you. And your answers lead us right into our next question. The pandemic has stunted learning of minority students due to the lack of tech that was required to keep up during the pandemic. What is your plan for helping students catch up?
Well, if there was a lack of technology for any student, I think we need to find out, we need to go do an audit of that local school district, because the federal government made so much money available to states for this issue during the pandemic that you know, there was so much money left over at our state that our superintendent, our current superintendent, wrote a letter to Washington asking for a waiver on how to spend this money so they could use it to buy diesel fuel. But if we've got enough money left over, we want to spend it on diesel fuel, then we haven't done something right. So if there was a lack of technology, we need to find out why.
So let me ask a question with that. Earlier,
Sure.
you mentioned connectivity in some of our rural communities, and some of our lower income households, even in urban and suburban areas, had issues or could have had issues with connectivity to the internet.
Right.
So if we had all this money and there's money left over, do we still have connectivity issues or in our rural communities or in some of our lower income pockets of the state? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think we still do. There are many different ways that you can try to tackle that issue. And I know that districts have. I mean, I did it as superintendent in McIntosh County. We had the connectivity issue, because even though there may be, you know, fiber available in the community, you have, you know, impoverished folks that can't get the internet into their home. So the school may send home, you know, wireless, you know, iPads or things like that. But if you live in a rural area, you may still have an issue getting the connectivity to, you know, the towers. There may not be a tower close enough to your home. So one of the things that we did in McIntosh, this was really before the days of the hotspots, is I took an old school bus and used some money that we had left from a grant, and we gutted it. We rebuilt the engine, we rebuilt the transmission, and we made it into a mobile computer lab. We made it into a wired computer lab with 16 computer stations in it. And every day of the week, we took that bus to a particular area of the community that had connectivity issues, and we made it available for 2 hours after school for students to come and to access the internet and do their homework. You know, there are ideas like that. There are because of COVID, there are so many, let's say, folks like T-Mobile and Verizon and those folks that have, you know, made hotspots available to school districts. You could take, you know, I'm actually doing work for a company now, some consulting work for a company called Leanstream, and they actually have mobile hotspots through T-Mobile that the school districts can get them and send them home. And you can connect up to 15 devices in your home to that one hotspot. Why not take, you know, 4 or 5 of those and put them on a school bus, and every kid could have access on the school bus, you know, to the internet. It's not ideal, but you could send those hotspots home, and a lot of districts did. You can send those hotspots home to the students, but you're still going to have an issue in some communities with the connectivity and being able to access those towers, those cell towers. So you're still going to have dead zones, dead spots. And I don't know that we've got a great solution to that until the state needs to keep pushing forward with fiber and getting fiber to every community. But again, that's gonna, you're gonna have issues too with people being able to afford to get it in their home. So there's not a perfect solution, but there are certainly many different avenues that we can leverage to get as many folks connected as possible.
John, I'm going to tell you, for me, just speaking for myself, listening to you talk about what happens in some of our rural communities is educational for me, because we live in Metro Atlanta. We live in many of us live in Cobb, Fulton, or Gwinnett County, and I'm hearing some things and learning some things about what happens in our rural communities that I just didn't know.
I'm telling you, when I went down there, because I've lived my whole life in North Georgia, and when I went to be superintendent there, it was an eye-opener. And not just, I mean, I knew some of the issues, but even the fact that we never knew what happened in Atlanta. we didn't get Atlanta news. You know, our news came out of Jacksonville, Florida. And so you never knew what was going on in Metro Atlanta. You didn't know what was going on with our legislature. So yes, there's some truth to that idea that there's two Georgias out there.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you this. Do you feel that you can depend on the legislature to help where funding is lacking? Or if not, what do we do about it?
Well, they control the purse strings. And so, and I've been there when funding was lacking. It's a challenge. You have to continue to nurture those relationships and build relationships and try to continue to get your point across. And that may even take local school superintendents and local school boards developing and nurturing relationships with their state senators and their state representatives, and getting them to their schools to tour and to maybe sit down. And one of the ideas that I have is for these educational town halls. I think, what you see in the news with parents getting upset at school board meetings and the hollering and the screaming, and, whether we're going to call them domestic terrorists or whatever we're going to call them, parents have questions, and then parents get upset when their questions don't get answered. Well, this idea that you can come and speak to the board, you get 3 minutes in most cases. Most parents cannot articulate the full nature of the problem in 3 minutes. And in most cases, most school boards, when the parent is finished, are going to say, "Thank you for your time. Next." There's no solution. And in many cases, they'll follow up and they'll have somebody on staff follow up with the parent. But school boards are there and having those meetings to conduct the business of the school district. They've got policies to vote on, they've got budget items to vote on, they've got financial reports to discuss and review. They've got a lot of business to take care of. And if you have 30 parents show up and everybody gets 3 minutes to speak, well, you're now an hour and a half into the meeting and you haven't even started your business yet. And so I think a better situation, most school superintendents in the state and most school board members have never been trained on how to conduct, let's say, an effective town hall meeting. How much better would it be, let's say, for the state superintendent, my department, to get together with the, let's say, the Georgia School Superintendents Association and then the Georgia School Boards Association, and let's design some training for superintendents and school board members on how to conduct effective town hall meetings, because then you could have a 2-hour block of time where the whole community is invited to come out and talk about concerns and issues. You could sit down at tables, you could vet things out, you could talk, you can devote time to the concerns and not give somebody 3 minutes and say thank you and sit down. So I think that developing those relationships is going to be key, especially when it comes to funding and the legislators. So I think it's really important for superintendents and principals and school board members to develop those relationships. And it's very important for the state superintendent to develop those relationships so that when the legislature is in session, you can go across the street and you can talk to them and you can talk about the issues in rural Georgia and urban Georgia and suburban Georgia, the funding issues and why, let's say, this amount of money may be needed and why it's critical not to cut. So the relationship piece is going to be key to work with the legislature.
Very cool. Well, thank you for that answer. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and then we're going to let you go and enjoy your evening, right? But one of the questions our viewers have is, how will you work with with the governor's office, to increase educational equity throughout Georgia?
Can I ask for a point of clarity on, because educational equity can mean different things to different people? I just want to make sure.
Tommy Welch asked that question. So Tommy, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and adding clarity to your question, we'd be more than happy to hear from you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. So speaking specifically to educational equity, providing an opportunity and the funding formula to give the districts as well as the students what they need when they need it. So you mentioned the variability of the school districts from the north end to the south end of the state.
Right. Right.
from different things that they need. The formulas that are provided, staffing formulas, as well as the funding formulas based upon the QBE, do not
Right.
allow for specific flexibility, nor is the curriculum or the graduation requirements. So how will you work with the governor's office to ensure that each district region gets what they need when they need it throughout your term, if you are brought to that? Also, in relation to educational equity, we are in a large state, almost majority minority state, and we don't have an equity officer, anyone who's responsible for it in that office. How will you go about ensuring that that takes place? I'm sure you're aware of the past relationship between the superintendent and the governor's office of student achievement. Specifically, how will you work to bring that together to ensure that educational equity takes place and all those variables that I mentioned throughout the state of Georgia?
Okay, so great question. I think again, the experience that I acquired going to rural McIntosh County was very helpful, because it did open my eyes to some real inequities in the state funding formula, and I think I have a much better platform from which to have that discussion with legislators. So for example, this whole idea of equalization in the state funding formula, that's where the school district may be charging local taxpayers 18 mils on their taxes. Well, they have to whatever they earn from the state funding formula, the state is going to withhold from that 5 mils. So whatever 5 mils would earn in said county, they would withhold that amount of money, and they call that your fair share. And then ultimately what happens is the state ranks counties based on wealth, and they will take, in some cases, it may be the top 25 school districts, I think, and it may fluctuate from year to year, but it's that those top tier counties that they consider to be the wealthiest counties in the state, and they draw a line, and every county that falls under that line receives additional money from the state in what's called equalization. And that additional money comes from that 5 mil share that they withhold from everybody. Where that funding formula is flawed, I found out in being superintendent in McIntosh County. McIntosh County is considered one of the top 25 wealthiest counties in the state, even though 100% of our students eat free and reduced lunch. And so of that 5 mils that they withhold from McIntosh County, that money goes to other counties in the state of Georgia, and McIntosh gets nothing. So McIntosh gets nothing in equalization, which is a real flaw in that funding formula. When the issue there is the state says, well, because of all of the land that you have on the coast, you're a land wealthy county. Well, what the state doesn't take into consideration is, specifically in McIntosh County, is that a full third of the land in the county is owned by either the federal government or the state government. And so there is zero opportunity for the county to tax that land or to develop that land to create any revenue off of a third of the land in the county. And so the formula has flaws in it that need to be addressed, because there are specifics within rural Georgia where some of your poorest counties are getting no equalization, but then you have some of your wealthiest counties that are getting millions of dollars. So it really needs to be looked at to bring in, for that equalization to really be effective and address the needs. Does that help?
Yeah, that. John, listening to you talk makes me want to just pick certain parts of our state and go actually immerse myself and visit them, so I can get a broader perspective than I get from my 26 years in Metro Atlanta, and all of them being in Cobb County, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just, for me, it's pretty interesting. But I want to ask our final question, and then we're going to let you go. So in your closing statements, I'd like to understand why people should, well, let me do this. I have some housekeeping I have to do first, if that's okay. One, sure. I have to mention that the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta is a nonpartisan organization. So we don't endorse or support any political party or candidate, but we are interested in increasing information to the residents of the state of Georgia, as well as increasing voter turnout in the state of Georgia. So that is why we hold these things. But again, we are a nonpartisan organization. But as you wrap up, I'd like to understand why in the primaries, why should somebody vote for you versus your challenger in the primaries? And what makes you different than even your Republican opponent or any of the Democratic opponents? Why is John better or different than any of these other folks? And if you can include that as part of your closing statement, we'd love to hear.
Sure. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys. I think, again, I was never going to do this again. And a couple of things that really nudged me to get back in it was, I guess the main thing is my daughter decided to put my grandchildren in private school. My grandson starts kindergarten. I mean, he's in pre-K now, and they're in he and his little sister are in a private pre-K, and next year she's going to continue in that private school with kindergarten, and I understand why she's doing what she's doing, but a majority of the parents in the state can't afford to do that. She's been a very successful businesswoman in her 20s. She's making 3 times the amount of money I was making at the end of my career with a doctorate degree as a superintendent, and she's 25 years old. But most parents can't afford to do that. And so who is going to step up to make sure that our children are being educated and they're being prepared to be successful? So that's really why I decided to get back in it. Is I really want our public schools to be, when folks want to talk about school choice, I want our public schools to be the school choice. That's the other thing about rural Georgia. When you start talking about school choice and vouchers, there is no choice in rural Georgia. There's no private school in our county. There was one high school, one middle school, and one elementary school. There was no private school. There's no charter school. Maybe there's one in the next county, but they didn't have transportation to get there. So how do we make sure our public schools are the school of choice? I think that now more than ever, we need a leader in this position who has the experience and the knowledge, and not just experience, but successful quality experience to lead education. And I think if you look at my track record, I think if you look at the fact that I have taught or been an administrator in rural Georgia, suburban Georgia, urban Georgia. I've been, assistant principal, curriculum director. I've been state director of career and technical education. I've been state superintendent. And all of those roles have been, and I've been local superintendent, they have been successful roles. I've been a star teacher. I taught high school English. I was recognized as Georgia's Assistant Principal of the Year in 2001 for the tremendous academic gains that we made with career tech students at Rome High School. Opened a brand new high school as a principal. In 1 year, took our high school from the lowest scores in the district of 6 high schools on the Georgia writing exam to the highest in 1 year. Being state superintendent, creating the Georgia Career Pathway System, getting us out of No Child Left Behind, getting one of the first states in the country to receive a waiver from No Child Left Behind. I've been to Washington and argued toe-to-toe with US Ed over teacher evaluation when they wouldn't grant us the waivers that we needed. And they were going to hold us to a system that someone wrote within the Race to the Top grant before I got there that would have made 50% of a teacher's evaluation based on student surveys. That was not a good idea. So I've had very successful experiences. I'm very passionate about public education. I think my opponent has worked within education. He worked 20 some odd years in the same rural South Georgia district. But there's experience and there's quality experience, and that's all I'm going to say. There's a lot there, and there's I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'll tell you, we
You
want
know,
to thank you. And I want to thank those who came on today, right? And we're going to rebroadcast this as well as the panel we had with your Democratic counterparts in the very near future. So others who couldn't make it today can see it and hear from you. It'll be on our social media pages. Again, it's the 100 Black Men of North Metro Atlanta. So if you go to 100 Black Men of Atlanta, you will not see it. But
Right.
North Metro Atlanta, you will, right? But we
Very good.
rebroadcast these and we share them. And we want to create a more informed electorate and encourage people to get out and vote. And we know this position is really critical for our students and the kids we mentor. And we want to thank you for giving up about an hour, a little bit over an hour of your time on a Thursday evening. There's any number of other things you could have been doing, but you chose to spend that time with us, and we do appreciate it. And again, we want to thank you and thank you everybody who joined today. And again,
Yes, thank all of you.
Hey,
Excuse
Art,
me?
I think Bernard had a question.
All right, we're going to let since he is the president, we're going to let Bernard ask a question, and then we're going to wrap up. Go ahead, Mr. President.
I didn't have a question. I was just clapping with the emoji. Well job. Good job. Wonderful
All
job.
right.
And thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. Like Dr. Vaughn said, we just want to make a more informed electorate, and that makes the electorate better, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you
Yeah,
again for your time.
absolutely.
Everyone else for joining us.
I'm grateful to you.
Well, John, we appreciate your time, but we are going to let you go. But this will get rebroadcast in the very near future. We have a luncheon coming up on April 30th where we celebrate our young men. It's called the Youth Achievement Luncheon. And that focus of that luncheon is just those guys. So if you want to check it out, you're more than welcome to come. It's at the Cobb Galleria Center. But again, we do want to thank you for giving us time so we can hear from you. So, early voting, starts May 2nd?
Yes, sir.
And primary election day is May 24th.
That's right.
And we look forward to seeing the outcome and how you fare. But we do appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you. And everybody have a good night.